Hello, in this episode, I am joined by the delightful Nathaniel J Hall, who is an actor. You might recognise him from It's a Sin, a writer, he's got some plays on, touring the UK, he'll talk about them in a bit, and HIV activist, which you'll also talk about in a bit. We will be talking about HIV, sex, and a little bit of drugs, and some pretty gross STI symptoms. So if that's the kind of thing you'd rather not hear about, for example, if you're eating a yogurt, maybe now's a good time to sit this one out. Otherwise, let's go. This is probably true. Please be aware that the following contains strong language and adult themes. It would be boring without them.
I was diagnosed with HIV from my first sexual experience when I was 16.
Hard luck.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, literally, what are the odds? Like, what are the odds? One day I'm going to work it out. I'm going to sit with a statistician and be like, what are the odds of that? Because that's pretty unlucky. But, so I'll tell that story briefly, and then I've got another story to tell.
Ooh, fun.
So essentially, I knew I was gay probably from about the age of 13. Maybe I was watching. Do you know what it was? I loved the Matrix films, and I used to be like, that was 1999, so I would have been about 13, 14. And I was like, isn't Keanu Reeves cool? I want to be like Keanu Reeves. And then like a few years later, really understanding that really strong urge was not I wanted to be like Keanu Reeves. It's like I want to be with Keanu Reeves. You know what I mean?
Aww.
So that was kind of my awakening. So I knew, but I was growing up. This is very late 90s, early noughties, in a school that didn't tackle homophobic bullying. Section 28 was in place. There wasn't as many role models. Queer people were just not as visible in the way that they are today, and if they were, it was often they were being outed by the press in quite shameful ways. Stephen Gately and all this sort of stuff, and Will Young. And actually, Will Young has a certain resonance with my story, because the guy that I met in 2003, whilst I was waiting for a cream tuxedo for my prom, looked a bit like Will Young. And so I met this guy, and I'd had all these feelings, and I'd had a bit of a thing with the head. I was the head boy at school, and I was living up to my reputation,
I bet
having
you
a
were.
little bit of a thing with the deputy head boy. I won't say what we got up to,
Nepotism.
in the attic, which when we were supposed to be watching Big Brother. But that was all quite very secretive and closeted, and we weren't able to be open and out, and I wanted to go to the prom with him, and all that sort of stuff, but it was not going to happen in Stockport in 2003. So I was having this cream tuxedo, which was probably my subliminal subconscious going, you've got to make sure everyone knows that you're not like them. Do you know what I mean? That you're a bit different.
Love it.
And so I met this guy on this park bench, and looking back, I'm like, a sprit dodge, because also he was a lot older. He was 26. I was this kind of nervous, shy, well, not shy, I wasn't shy, but I was this kind of slightly anxious, nervous 16-year-old. But here was all of a sudden this person that was validating everything that I knew to be true and that I felt. And that was really intoxicating and really powerful. He was attractive, and he was tanned, and he had bleached tips in his hair, ripped jeans, and he was very 2003 gay, but very, very gay. And all of a sudden it was like, that's the exotic creature that I know I am or want to become. So we go into this relationship, sort of keeping it secret from my family. And over that summer, after school's finished, we go to have sex. And in his apartment, his flat. I call it an apartment. It wasn't an apartment. It was a block of council flats. We're trying to upsell it here. It wasn't glam.
It's your story. You can make it as romantic as you want. Maybe it was a penthouse in the
That's
council
the bit
flat. Who
that's
knows?
probably true. No, it was a council flat in Stockport. And
Oh, the glamour.
I was, but it was my first time, and he was older than me, and he was showing me the ropes, and
Oh,
so
using ropes on your first time.
no, not quite that adventurous. But we had sex. It wasn't the first time. It's not always that great, as lots of gay men will say. It takes a bit of training and getting used to. But that basically, that in summary, that relationship didn't really go anywhere. My parents found out. My mum sort of was like, he's too old for you. We sort of had this conversation about HIV, which was a little bit too late at that point, but she didn't know that. I didn't know that. I was starting college. He was worked for an airline. He was cabin crew. He was living this very different life, and I was about to go to college and meet new people, and just different people, really. So I that relationship ended, and I eventually I started getting symptoms when I was on holiday. I had a really, really nasty seroconversion to the HIV, which is when your body starts to create antibodies and fight back. I got really sick, lost 2 stone. I had all sorts of other symptoms. I started college. I was really sickly and gaunt. You look at pictures. I had discharge downstairs. I had it was a terrible time. Like I'm just about to turn 17, raring to go with my sexuality, going to a new college, and I'm like, you've got discharge, kind of stumbling as I was getting out of the starting block. So anyway, I go to the GUM clinic, as they were called back then, at the hospital, and get tested. Have a whole shopping list of sexually transmitted infections. They offered me the HIV test. I refused because you could opt out back then, and they kind of know, like the doctor kind of knows that's what it is. He's checked my lymph nodes. I literally tick every box, and so gently kind of encourages me to keep coming back to the clinic. And eventually, I get tested for HIV, and I find out I'm HIV positive. And it's like we were saying before, like what are the odds? But also it felt a little bit like at that point where I was like, right, now go be really gay. Like I've just discovered who I am. Go and be really gay. And then it's a bit like, I always say it's a bit like
Try not to drip on the floor while you're at it.
It's like Coach Carr in Mean Girls, like don't have sex, you will get chlamydia and die. And the message at school in sex ed was don't be gay, you will get HIV and die. You'll get AIDS and die. It's awful, awful. I grew up in that era, 86. I was born right into the middle of that.
And then there you are, speed running it.
Absolutely. But what it was kind of a little bit in my psyche, it was like what formulated very early on in my psychosexual kind of self was this idea that those narratives around that we have to overcome about being gay is wrong, it's shameful, it's dirty, because you will get these things, sexually transmitted, whatever, or that it's sinful again, in the eyes of the Lord or whatever. That prophecy came true for me at a very early age. So at a very early age, where I was kind of still formulating my sense of sexual self, it was like, yeah, do you know what? Actually, if you do gay shit, you'll get burned. Do you know what I mean? And so it had this really profound effect. And for my, I guess for the next 15 years or so, or maybe even longer, it had a real control over me. I had a really difficult relationship with sexual fluids, and this is the era before U equals U and PrEP. I wasn't put onto medication for 5 years. And even then, when I was put onto medication, we didn't know that meant you were undetectable and you couldn't pass it on. So there was constant fear, of passing it on. So my relationship with sex was quite complicated. But anyway, that's all context. Let's get to the real story. So
that wasn't the real story. Good Lord.
No, that's old news, that one.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, if we fast forward to 2000,
just before we do, I just want to jump in very quickly with the when you said there was a shopping list of STIs, was that tests, or were you or had this one encounter managed to tick all the boxes?
Oh no, that was I think at the time it was gonorrhea, non-specific urethritis, genital warts, and then HIV came a few weeks later.
All from one bag.
It was a few for the same person. So
good Lord. And that's quite a stereotype with the cabin crew as well. I mean, they are known for getting around, but still.
I know, and it's just not what a kind of any 17-year-old gay man wants as they're coming out into their sexual self.
Welcome. Here's all the diseases and Kylie.
Yeah, but also I kind of got them all. I kind of got it out of the way, like straight away, which is kind of easier then. And also it made me very well versed in the sexual health clinic, and actually getting HIV so early on, whilst it had a lot of negative and damaging effects long term in terms of my mental well-being and sexual relationships and stuff, actually what it did do is it kept me safe sexually as well, because I didn't want to get anything else. So actually, that it kind of was like the ultimate sex ed lesson.
Yeah, a little bit harsher than was absolutely necessary, perhaps.
Absolutely, yeah. Bit harsher than just putting a condom on a banana.
Terrifying. And Sticky. No wonder you were oozing everywhere. Bless you.
Well, literally. Well, this is what the next one's oozier. So let me tell you.
Oh, fantastic. Sorry, I will shut up. Anyway, back to the story you actually wanted to tell us.
So if we fast forward to 2019, I've been through a lot. Like, I've been through a couple of relationships. I've been through a single period. My latest relationship that I've been in for 5 years has been really chaotic. A lot of codependency. I made a show about it. I made a show about that first story called First Time, and I made a show about that last relationship called Toxic. But we trauma bonded over various different things in our lives, and I just escaped that relationship. 5 years in that. But also during that period of time, U equals U had come in. PrEP was becoming more available and more widespread, and people knew about it. And the kind of HIV landscape was radically changing. And all of a sudden, I was going back into being single with like the ability to really explore my sexuality, and actually, so it's kind of a little bit like another coming out, like when I was 16, but this is only a few years ago. And so I was like, great, I've escaped that relationship. I'm ready. I'm going to get myself out there. I'm going to try some new things sexually. And so I did, and I threw myself into it. And I decided, I was like, I'm going to go to a sex party because that's what we do. That's what queer people do. And
Good on
I,
you for getting an invite to a sex party. First off, like if anyone's listening to this, slide into my DMs. I've got quite a bit of space in my calendar. Sorry, carry on.
So I was like, this is something I'm going to try. If I like it, I don't like it. If I don't like it, I don't like it. So I go to this party, and you know, as we all know, like I've been seeing those letters my whole life on Grinder, H and H, high and high and horny, and it feels like everyone's doing it, right? And it seems like it's really prolific, and I'm like, I've never done that. So anyway, I go one day. Let's try that and let's do it. I'm free. I'm single, and also I don't need to worry about I do need to worry about STIs. I don't need to worry about HIV as such because the landscape has changed.
Yeah, it's like HIV completed it, mate. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
And so I go to this party, and I'm like, do I? I'm not sure. Do I enjoy it or don't I enjoy it? I think a lot of sex, if you have sex whilst high, is it just kind of keeps going, and it's just like quite repetitive. So so yeah, I'm at this party, and it sort of smells of like sex and regrets when I walk in. Oh, and I remember going actually, and I was in the taxi, and as I was getting closer, I was like, I recognize where we are, and I was like, oh, okay, that's my cousin. That's my cousin's old house. My auntie and uncle used to live there, so I like know the area, and it's like real suburbia. And we're talking like big detached properties here, not like. And like driving up and going, it's like 1 a.m. I'm a little bit like worse for wear, and I'm like, am I? Am I just like going to knock on some like old lady's door here? Like, am I going to the right place? But it turns out it was the right place. Um, and yes, I go in, like I say, it smells a bit of sex and regrets. And I kind of know deep down that maybe I don't really want to be there. But this is what queer people do, right? So I'm going to throw myself into it. So I do. And I kind of go, I guess. And it was kind of nice talking to people and meeting new people. But anyway, I come home, and then I start to realize actually at this point that maybe the traumas of my past, I'm a little bit off the rails. I'm kind of like putting myself in risky situations and doing things that maybe I otherwise wouldn't if I was in a better kind of headspace. And I kind of go, let's put the brakes on this. I need to sort out the 5 years that I've just been through in this tumultuous relationship. I need to get underneath the skin of this HIV diagnosis. I've got complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I get hold of everything. I grab it by the horns. And my career's going really well at this point. I've just been cast in It's a Sin. My first show's done really well. I'm planning another show. Um, and then I start to get symptoms again, right? In the downstairs region. And these are like symptoms that I've not had since I was 16. And it's sticky down there. Do you know what I mean? And it's quite painful. And I'm quite poorly. And actually, whilst I was filming It's a Sin, I wasn't poorly, but I wasn't great. I was quite run down, and I had all this dry skin around my nose here, and the makeup team, bless them, were really good at like covering it up. And I'm supposed to be like doing this amazing thing, and actually there's this kind of other thing that's getting in the way. And so eventually, I have a full checkup when I have my HIV checkup every 6 months. So I get an STI checkup, and I'm like, it's come back totally clear, nothing. And I'm like, I'm not sure I trust that. But anyway, I'm really busy, and I don't have time to go back to the STI clinic. So I go and see my GP, and I go in, and she's like, seems really out of her depth, because I'm literally walking on mentioned sex party, and she's like, oh, okay. Not sure this was in the training manual.
I do love the carefully blank face.
Yes,
of,
yes.
Behind it, you can see that they're like,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
And so I sort of tell her, and she has a look, and she's like, "Oh, I think you need to see a dermatologist." And I'm like, "For my ass." But anyway, I'm like, I don't question her authority. You're the GP. You've done the 5-7 years medical training or whatever. So I get a referral to a dermatologist. That takes like 6 to 8 weeks, and it's just like dragging, and things have kind of improved, but like it's not great down there. And and so I go to this dermatologist, and she takes one look at it, and she's like, why the have they sent you to me? It's just not my jurisdiction. You need to see a colorectal specialist. So then I get another referral, which is another 6 to 8 weeks, and by this point, another viruses always get in the way in my life. Another virus hits us. It's coronavirus.
Yeah, I heard of that one.
Yeah, that one kind of gets in the way of all our lives. So then everything just like almost goes to a standstill in the NHS. And this referral that I've got is just dragging and dragging and dragging. And all the while, it's not really getting any better. Eventually, I go and see this doctor, this specialist, and he's like, you're going to need a camera up your bum. And I'm like, what? And he's like, you're going to need an endoscopy. We're going to book you in for an endoscopy. And I'm like, great. Okay. So they give me all this stuff on the endoscopy, booked in again, like another 6-week wait or whatever for this endoscopy. And in the interim, I have my next HIV appointment with my clinic, and it's on the phone. They've sent me the kit, the bloods. I'm on the phone talking to the clinical lead nurse, and I've known her for years. I tell her, and she's like, I know exactly what it is. She was like, it's LGV chlamydia. I can tell you now without looking at tests. The symptom you're describing to me is LGV chlamydia. And she's like, long term, if it's not treated, it can do a lot of damage. So I want to get you on antibiotics straight away, even without. We'll send you a test, but we're going to start you on antibiotics straight away. So I'm put on this 4-week course of antibiotics. In the interim, I have to go to see this colorectal specialist, this guy who likes shoving cameras up people's bums.
I mean, it's an interesting career choice, isn't it?
Well, do you know what? It was fascinating. Other than the diet that you have to eat is minging. You have to go on this really low fiber diet, which for me is I was a vegetarian at the time. I'm vegan now. Literally, the options are like mashed carrot and Swede and white bread, and that's it. It's like an orange squash for about 2 weeks, and then cornflakes. You know, cornflakes, and then the day before you have to take laxatives. And let me tell you, there are explosive laxatives. There is that is the ultimate like douche prep, because nothing, literally, there is not an ounce of food within your body at all. And so you go to and they put you on your side. You have gas and air because it's not the most comfortable thing, and then you can see it on screen, so you're kind of like really really high. I don't know if you've had gas and air. It's like really like sends you like only briefly, but it like sends you kind of really quite loopy, and then you can see inside yourself, and then they take a little sample using little snips that you can sort of feel somewhere in here. And so anyway, the tests from that all come back absolutely fine. You know, there's nothing untoward. But what I'm left with is like it's not hideous, but it's like a little bit of scarring downstairs. Do you know what I mean? Bit on the inside, bit on the outside, and it's like I say, it's like doesn't look like a drop pie or anything, but it's like it's not. It's not what it looked like when I was 16. Do you know what I mean? It's not fresh as a daisy anymore.
I mean, time makes fools of us all in that particular area, babes. But
absolutely.
I just want to check: LGB chlamydia, is that like lesbian, gay, and bis, or is that something else?
LGV.
LGV chlamydia. All right.
Lesbian, gay and don't know what the
Vegans.
vegans. Yeah, I don't know.
Lesbian and gay vegans. I'm not up on the various flavors of chlamydia,
No,
so
I didn't know there was different flavors of chlamydia, and apparently that's the worst one.
but you've
Um,
had them all now. Like
yeah,
you've completed the chlamydia scrapbook as well. It's a
yeah.
disgusting image. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
And so, I sort of get the all clear. The antibiotics work literally like, straight away. And I
Congratulations.
kind of go like, what just happened? Like, other than the fact that, like, coronavirus was just this crazy time. My grandfather sadly passed away in the early part of the coronavirus pandemic. We couldn't go to his funeral. We couldn't see him in hospital. So many people have these horrific stories around that time. But I was just like, what happened? How did I go from being like, yes, I've escaped this awful relationship to having a camera up my bum and like having horrific scarring? It's not horrific. Just put it out there. If anyone listens to this ever, meets me, it's not that horrific. But you know what I mean. And do you know, I was reflecting on it, and the reason I wanted to tell the two stories is because actually both of those times, I was doing things that are not inherently bad things. They're just sexual acts with different consenting people. But actually, there was the real overriding factor in them that was that I felt a lot of shame, a lot of fear, and a lot of anxiety at those times in my life. And it was the reasons why I was seeking out different sexual things or doing things with when I was 16. I knew it was like 26 years old, 10 years older than me. I've seen the Stranger Danger videos, but it was exciting, and it was all of a sudden it was like, well, the world has not allowed me to be who I am, so I'm going to put two fingers up and and do this thing and be secretive and naughty, and I think a lot of queer sex and gay sex is often linked to sexual thrill and secrecy because we have to live in the closet for so long. And then this other time was like really, when I reflect back, actually, I wasn't that empowered. I wasn't making empowering decisions, to about my sex or my sex life. I was kind of using it as a tool of self harm. So I guess the moral of the story is like, um, is a I think as queer people we have to do a lot of work on being really empowered to have the sex that we want, and also not just have the sex that we think we should be having, because we think everyone else is having it. Um, and yeah, just like get your STI checkups, queens, because you don't want to have a camera up them. I had to have two. I had to go back for a second camera up the bum, and you get a nice biscuit and a cup of coffee at the end, but that's it.
I
You
have done
don't.
worse for less, but still, it's not what you want, is it? Was the second? Did you need a zoom lens or something on the second one? Like
I
you had to
don't
go
know.
back in.
Maybe it was cute in there, and he just wanted to have another look. The first one they
Oh,
took a biopsy, and the second one was to check for like the all clear or something.
oh,
So
well done on getting through it and collecting all of those STIs along the way.
if I had a bingo card, I would have said bingo a long time ago.
Oh, bless you. But look at you now. I do find, as someone who, has been around the houses a bit, shall we say? I mean, I'm somewhere between 30 and 75 years old, and I'm single, so I've got around a bit. It's you do come to kind of regard the STIs as just like, oh, it's just a occupational hazard. Basically, it's going to happen. It's the tax you pay. It's going to happen occasionally. You just have to try and not worry about it too much and take as many precautions as you can. But I do sometimes see people, not usually my age, usually a little bit younger, who are perhaps a little bit less experienced, really worrying about it because they've either not had one or something, and even when they're like, oh no, it's oh, it might be chlamydia, oh, it might be gonorrhea. I'm like, it's just some pills or an injection in your bum, and you're fine in a week, babes. There's
Oh,
nothing to
I'd
worry about.
forgotten about the. Is that for gonorrhea? The injection in the bum? I can't remember which one it is.
But
Yeah.
yeah, you feel it right down your leg as well. It really kind of. Oh. Anyway, and it's. I think the perspective that comes with me just having like ground my way through all of them, and you having such traumatic things to start with, in a way, I suppose when you've been up here, anything else is just kind of like, you're ready with anything. It's almost as if the worst has happened for you, maybe in that regard, at least. Like, I'm not in the rest of your life, and you can relax a little bit and just be like, you know what, I've been through this. I know how to deal with it?
I was well versed in the sexual health clinic very, very early on. I was going.
They all knew you by your first name in
Oh,
there, yeah.
absolutely. That was purely because the HIV, and I was so young, and also when you first get diagnosed back then, you were monitored much more closely than you are now. You're just sort of put straight onto medication now, and as long as you reach undetectable within 3 months, and it's fine. You're just there every 6 months. But I was there quite a lot. But I guess on the other hand, what going through that experience very early on did was give me all this sexual anxiety, because for me, sex became sort of synonymous with being sick or getting sick. So there was all this kind of fear. I went into a relationship, an 8-year relationship after I was diagnosed. He remained negative, but we had to use condoms for that whole entire relationship. And there was just this always this fear. We don't often talk about sex and desire with our partners, really deeply. This just added another barrier in the way of that as well. So I've had to do a lot of unlearning in the last sort of 5 years or so to try and reassess my relationship with sex, and to not fall back into those patterns of like it having to be in the shadows or it having to be secretive, and being empowered to actually be really sex positive, because I always thought it was like, I'm living my best queer life doing all these things, and actually, you know what, I wasn't, because to go to that party I had to be drunk and high, or like, not to say again that that's inherently a bad thing, but in order to loosen my inhibitions, that's what I have sort of had to do. And it's like I question, I go, I should be able to do that if I without. And then I question, is it something that I actually want to do, or is it self-harming in some way?
The question that you have to kind of ask yourself is, do I need to be high to do this? And is that a good thing, really? Because yeah, and good for you for doing that kind of interrogation and that kind of thing. You said you had an unusual relationship with sex after that first diagnosis. Being a horny teenager, it's like you're gonna still want to do it. So how was that relationship manifesting before you started going to sex parties because everyone was?
Well, I mean, that was a long time after that. But when I was first diagnosed, I think I went straight into a relationship, and we fomented quite a powerful relationship because of that. We bonded over this experience, this thing that had happened. It sort of turned out in the long run to kind of be our downfall, and he ended up leaving me for one of our friends who he'd been having a relationship with, and then he got married to them. It was
Well, that's awkward.
all very dramatic. I was throwing his clothes out of the front door and out the top window as well, because we just moved in together. But I think my relationship with sex, I say complicated, because yes, I'm still a sexual being, and and I've still got a sex drive, and I still love sex, and I love gay sex, and I love queer sex, and I wouldn't change it for the world. I always struggled to communicate what I wanted, and I don't think I even knew what I wanted. In more recent years, as I've tried to push through that, the sex I've had has just like gone off the charts in terms of like quality. Like I'm nearly 40 and I'm having the best sex of my life. And you hear people say that and you're like, really? Is that true? And you're like, yeah, that's true. Because there were so many hang-ups and anxieties in my 20s, you know, not just the HIV stuff and everything, but also just the general hang-ups of like, body hang-ups and trying to fit in, and like, when I go out, do I have to? I have to. You have to go to bed with someone at the end of the night, and all these fucking stupid things, these stupid pressures that are there in our hypersexualized queer culture, that actually now I look at and go, why did you buy into that? Why did you worry so much about all those things? And why didn't you just on focus more on consent and pleasure of what you want and what your partners want? But no one gives us the tools to have that conversation. No one equips us. When I had that first encounter with this guy who was 10 years older than me, the glamorous flat in Stockport, glamorous apartment, he pulled out the safer sex pack that you get in the bars in Manchester, and then he just put the condoms to one side and took the lube. And I was a little bit like, I wasn't stupid. I knew about STIs, and I was like, I think I want to use condoms. And he was like, no, it's fine. I've just had a full STI checkup. And in that situation, as a kind of timid, scared 16-year-old being shown the ropes, you're like, okay, It's, like, it's my rite of passage, isn't it? So you're going to trust the person older. And I think often we're modeling our sexual behaviors from our queer elders who have modeled it from theirs, and it's not always been the best. And I love gay people, I love our community, but there's a lot of trauma, and there's a lot of, you know we're not always that great at, like, navigating consent and pleasure, and all those kind of things. So I think we learn bad habits from one another. And I don't think it's uncommon. I speak to almost all my friends. They talk about their first sexual experience, and most people, it was with a man who was older than them. And I'm not saying that's inherently bad, because I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, you can't have an age gap. But there's a difference between, like, say, a 26-year-old and a 36-year-old having sex or a relationship, and a 16-year-old and a 26-year-old. There is a difference. So so I think, yeah, there's sometimes I go, we're great and we're so open, and we talk about the sex with, like, we have this hypersexual culture, but we're not always. And sometimes I'm like, we need to have a conversation and get our house in order here, because we're not always getting it right, and it's doing people a lot of harm in places.
Absolutely. You touched on something then that was really interesting about the traumas and stuff that we inherit. I love that water bottle that we inherit from our essentially our gay elders, because for those, especially a generation above us, like, sex was a very rebellious, very defining act. It was the thing that was exciting. It was the thing that was banned. It was having sex was the way that they would fight the all of the powers and the stigma and all that kind of thing. And now things are different, and we don't need to think about it like that anymore. We can look at it with a different lens and be like, all right, yes, people were having all the sex they could because it was an act of rebellion, it was an act of resistance to blah blah blah. Nowadays we are lucky enough and privileged enough that we can kind of go, all right, well, being sex positive doesn't mean having all the sex you can all the time. Being sex positive means understanding what sex you want to have and being empowered enough to ask for it and get it or walk away. It's a very different landscape to, when we were younger. It was all fields when we were younger. And now our thinking may evolve, but culturally perhaps it takes a bit longer for the rest of the world to catch up.
Yeah, but if you think about the generation that were kind of, if we talk about the HIV/AIDS generation, so the gay men who were coming of age in the late 70s, early 80s, and kind of maybe early 90s, they were dealing with this, awful, horrific pandemic. But also, if lots of them were coming of age in a time when, to get sex, the places you had to go to specific places to get it. You had to go cruising or to cottaging. When you're having those first sexual encounters when you're younger, you can't often have it at home, because back then, particularly, there was less social acceptance of queer people. So you're going to find it in these places, and these places and spaces, again, are not inherently bad in any way, and having sex in in that way is not a bad thing in of itself. But I think if your first sexual experience is kind of fomented around this very, very secretive, but also very, very, like, kind of nerve-wracking and anxiety inducing and kind of thrilling experience, like, will I get caught, like, what's going to happen, or, like, you know I'm going to have sex with someone, with a stranger outside, like, it's really dangerous. And I think if that's some of your early formation of sex, your sexual desires become kind of associated with thrill. Like, you need thrill, and what's the next thrill? How's it going to be bigger and better? And if you're our generation, I guess that moved online. Yeah, that moved into grind. Well, when I was gaydar, whatever, nannery around gaydar, with profiles and the kind of advent of social media. And there's a whole other conversation to have about us as the generation. We were the first generation that started our lives non-digital and became digital through it. We were at that transition. So, the whole of the conversation there, but it kind of, the same thing went online. So this idea of, like, where we seek out sex is still hidden. So we don't go to the cruising ground or the cottage or the sauna. We go online to a hidden, closed space to seek out sex. And I think the same patterns kind of play out.
Mm.
And I think there is a generation after us that maybe is slightly or maybe even slightly rejecting that. I don't know, or like that idea. But I do think that until we have a world where LGBTQ plus young people are free to be themselves, absolutely in school, free to date people of their own age, to experiment with people of their own age, I feel like that sort of generational trauma, sexual trauma, might just continue getting passed on, um, and 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 that's why I think it's really important for sex positive education and LGBTQ inclusive education, and continually fighting for a world that starts to have this conversation more openly. And yeah, that's my TED talk on it.
We become for others the person we wish we'd had for ourselves. That's a badly worded version of that.
No, I quite liked that. Yeah, I
Yeah,
get that.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's the only way to work through trauma in a lot of ways. If you're not actively helping others not have to deal with the shit that you went through, then you haven't dealt with your trauma properly. Because you hear so many people like, "Well, it was fine. Like I went through blah blah blah. I don't see why anyone else shouldn't." And like, well, it clearly wasn't fun, and it's fucked you up. So maybe that's the reason why no one else should do it. But yeah, no, I agree. Wonderful, thank you. That is a delightful story of cameras up bums and all sorts of traumas.
I can't believe I'm committing it to record. I haven't told anyone. Well, I have, but I've not kind of told it in kind of explicit detail like that. I'm thinking some of it might go in my next show, which is called A-Hole. So.
Oh, fantastic. Well, what a fantastic segue into you paying the bills. So tell us all about where people can find you, what's going on, what your projects are, and how people can support you and your amazing work.
Yeah, so my website is nathanielJhall.co.uk, and my handle on Instagram and X, formerly known as Twitter. Actually, I'm going to call it Twitter. It's the only thing we're allowed to dead name. It's okay to dead name Twitter, isn't it? And is at Nathaniel J Hall. And my current show, Toxic, premiered last year in October. The new and improved version is going on tour from September this year. So it's touring much of England and hopefully maybe Wales as well. About 50 shows, 60 shows I think we're doing.
Wow.
And I've also got a short documentary on Channel 4 Digital coming out very, very soon about a unique HIV subculture. And it's a little bit shocking. So I've seen things that I can't unsee. So that's coming up as well. And like I say, I'm just about to delve into working on my new show, which is a sort of stand-up show with a bit of a twist. It's not that you get to see my hole. Sorry.
I thought about saying that, and I'm like, no, I'm better than that, and I'm glad that I wasn't the only one who thought it. So that's good. So if people want to see Toxic when it's on tour...
Best place is to follow me on social media at Nathaniel J Hall, or follow my theatre company at Dibby Theatre, Dibby, or sign up for our newsletter on dibbytheatre.org. But if you follow me, I won't shut up about it, so you'll be sick of it, honestly. So just follow me and then you'll know.
It's going to be sick of hearing about your a-hole. Fantastic. I look forward to the grand opening.
That's brilliant. That's going in the publicity.
That was Probably True, the LGBTQ plus storytelling project created to remind all of our queer siblings that we are none of us alone. If you liked it, then comment, share, subscribe, and join the Patreon. Or just tell all your friends. If you didn't like it, tell me. Come at me, bro.